The crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling of the Grand Imperial Hotel sparkled like 1,000 stars. Soft violin music drifted through the ballroom as elegantly dressed guests laughed over glasses of champagne. Every table was decorated with white roses, and photographers moved from group to group, capturing smiles that looked perfect from the outside. At the center of it all stood Ethan Williams. Tall, handsome, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He looked every bit the image of a billionaire heir. Women admired him from across the room. Business leaders shook his hand with enthusiasm, and reporters eagerly waited for a chance to ask him questions. Yet behind his calm smile was a man who had never felt more alone. Tonight was supposed to have been one of the happiest nights of his life. Instead, it became the night that changed everything. Ethan glanced toward the stage where workers were making final preparations for what should have been his engagement announcement to his longtime girlfriend, Isabella Grant. Their relationship had been the talk of the city for months. Society magazines had already begun predicting the extravagant wedding that would unite two influential families. Everything seemed perfect. At least that was what everyone believed. His phone vibrated. A message from Isabella. "Meet me in the private lounge. We need to talk." His stomach tightened. There was something strange about the wording. No heart emoji. No smile. Just those cold words. He excused himself from a conversation with several investors and made his way through the luxurious hotel corridor toward the private lounge. The moment he reached the door, he heard voices inside. One belonged to Isabella. The other belonged to her best friend, Monica. Ethan was about to knock when Monica laughed. "So after tonight, you'll officially become Mrs. Williams." Isabella laughed softly. "I know. You don't even sound excited." There was a brief silence. Then Isabella spoke words that pierced Ethan's heart. "Excited? Monica, let's be realistic." "What do you mean?" "I like Ethan. He's kind, respectful, and good-looking. But would I have dated him if he wasn't worth billions?" Monica burst into laughter. "Absolutely not." "Exactly." Ethan froze. His hand remained suspended in the air. Inside the room, Isabella continued speaking. "I've spent 2 years building this relationship. 2 years pretending to enjoy board meetings, charity dinners, and business conferences. You deserve an award. I deserve his family's fortune." The two women laughed again. Monica lowered her voice. "What if he loses everything someday?" Isabella answered without hesitation. "Then I'd leave." Another laugh. "You're terrible." "I'm practical." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. His heartbeat echoed loudly in his ears. Every memory of the last 2 years suddenly became meaningless. Every "I love you," every kiss, every promise, every dream. It had all been an investment, not in love, in money. He quietly stepped away from the door before they could discover him. The hallway suddenly felt colder. His breathing became heavy. He walked aimlessly through the empty corridors until he reached the rooftop garden overlooking the city. Below him, millions of lights stretched into the distance. Cars moved through the streets like tiny stars. The city looked beautiful, but Ethan felt completely broken. A few minutes later, the ballroom manager rushed upstairs. "Mr. Williams, everyone is waiting." Ethan forced a smile. "I'm afraid there won't be an engagement tonight." The manager blinked in confusion. "What? It's canceled." Without another word, Ethan walked away. Within minutes, whispers spread across the ballroom. Guests looked at one another in confusion. Reporters scrambled for answers. Isabella stormed out of the private lounge, only to discover Ethan had already left the hotel. By the next morning, every newspaper carried the same headline: "Billionaire heir calls off engagement." No one knew why. Ethan refused every interview. He simply disappeared from public view. For the next several weeks, Ethan remained inside the enormous Williams family estate on the outskirts of the city. The mansion was magnificent. It had marble floors imported from Italy, an indoor swimming pool, private cinema, a library larger than many public schools. Beautiful gardens surrounded the estate. Everything money could buy. Yet none of it brought him peace. He spent most mornings sitting alone in the garden with a cup of coffee, staring silently at the flowers. His mother, Margaret Williams, watched him from her office window. Margaret was one of the most respected businesswomen in the country. She had transformed Williams Global Holdings into a multinational empire employing over 40,000 people. Despite her reputation as a fearless CEO, she remained, above all else, a loving mother. Seeing her only son like this broke her heart. One afternoon she found him sitting beneath an old oak tree. "Mind if I join you?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You never have to ask." She sat beside him. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Finally she asked softly, "Still thinking about Isabella?" He nodded. "I thought she loved me." Margaret sighed. "I warned you. I know. I saw the signs. I know. But I wanted to believe she was different." Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. "You have a good heart, Ethan. Maybe too good." "No." He stared toward the colorful flower beds. "I've dated actresses." He counted on his fingers. "Models. Lawyers. Executives. Socialites. Every relationship ends the same way. They don't love me. They love the Williams name." Margaret remained silent. "I don't even know what real love looks like anymore." His voice cracked. "I honestly don't." For the first time since he was a child, tears filled Ethan's eyes. Margaret hugged him. He leaned against her shoulder. For a while, neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence said everything. A week later, Ethan accompanied his mother to the headquarters of Williams Global Holdings. The company's headquarters occupied an entire city block. The 60-story glass building reflected the morning sunlight like polished crystal. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Employees hurried through the revolving doors carrying laptops and coffee cups. As Ethan stepped out of the limousine, everyone greeted him enthusiastically. "Good morning, Mr. Williams. It's an honor to see you, sir. Congratulations on your upcoming promotion." People smiled. They bowed slightly. Some even looked nervous. Inside the building, executives rushed to open doors for him. Secretaries immediately offered coffee. Managers abandoned conversations just to greet him. Everything revolved around his status. Ethan smiled politely, but something caught his attention. Near the front entrance, an elderly gardener struggled to push a heavy wheelbarrow filled with soil. The man accidentally dropped a flower pot. It shattered across the walkway. A senior executive walked past him. Instead of helping, the executive frowned. "Clean that mess immediately." Then he continued walking. Another employee stepped around the broken pieces without even looking at the old man. No one stopped. No one helped. Ethan quietly walked over. "Need a hand?" The gardener looked surprised. "You don't have to, sir." "I want to." Together they picked up the scattered soil and broken pieces. The old man smiled warmly. "Thank you." Ethan noticed something unusual. The gardener's smile looked more genuine than every smile he had received inside the building. As they finished cleaning, the old man spoke. "You know." "What?" "I've worked here 26 years. "Really?" The gardener nodded. "I've watched hundreds of executives come and go. And I can tell what kind of person someone is by how they treat people like me." Those words stayed with Ethan for the rest of the day. That evening he entered Margaret's office. She was reviewing financial reports when he closed the door behind him. "I've made a decision." She looked up. "What is it?" "I don't want to become CEO yet." Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" "I want to understand this company first." "You already know it." "No. I know the boardroom. I know investors. I know balance sheets. But I don't know the people." Margaret leaned back. "What are you suggesting?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I want to work here." She smiled. "You already do." He shook his head. "Not as Ethan Williams." Her smile disappeared. "I want to work as a gardener." Silence filled the room. Margaret stared at him as if she had misheard. "A gardener?" "Yes. You've never done manual labor in your life." "I'll learn." "Why?" "Because nobody pretends around gardeners." He walked toward the large window overlooking the company grounds. If a woman can respect a Gardner, if employees can respect a Gardner, then I'll know their kindness is real. Margaret slowly stood. This isn't just about finding a wife. No, it's also about finding out what kind of company we're really running. She crossed her arms. You know this won't be easy. I know. You'll be mocked. I expect it. You'll work under the hot sun. I'll survive. You might even hate every minute. Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe. But if I spend the rest of my life wondering whether people love me or my money, that would be much harder. Margaret studied her son carefully. She no longer saw the heartbroken man who had left the hotel weeks earlier. She saw determination, purpose, growth. Finally, she nodded. If we're doing this, we do it properly. No special treatment. No secret bodyguards following you. No expensive watches. No luxury cars. Ethan grinned. Deal. She extended her hand. He shook it. Starting Monday, Margaret said with a smile, you're officially the newest Gardner at Williams Global Holdings. Neither of them realized that one decision, made in the quiet of a CEO's office, would not only expose the darkest secrets hidden within the company but also lead Ethan to the one woman who would change his life forever. Monday morning arrived much sooner than Ethan expected. Instead of waking to the gentle sound of classical music from the smart speakers in his luxurious bedroom, he forced himself out of bed before dawn. It was the first day of his new life, a life where he would no longer be addressed as Mr. Williams or treated like the future CEO of Williams Global Holdings. He stood in front of the large mirror inside his bedroom, looking at himself one last time. The man staring back at him was polished and wealthy. His neatly styled hair, expensive wristwatch, and tailored pajamas all reflected the privileged life he had always known. That man was about to disappear. Ethan removed the luxury watch his late father had given him for his 25th birthday. He carefully placed it inside a velvet-lined drawer. Next came the gold cufflinks. Then the designer shoes. Finally, he folded away his custom-made suits. His wardrobe manager had already prepared the clothes Margaret had approved for his disguise. A faded brown work shirt, a pair of old green trousers with patched knees, heavy, worn-out work boots, a sun-faded cap, simple gardening gloves. The clothes smelled faintly of soil and fertilizer. For the first time in his life, Ethan wore clothes that no one would admire. He studied himself in the mirror again. The transformation was remarkable. The billionaire air was gone. In his place stood an ordinary gardener looking for honest work. Margaret knocked softly before entering. She smiled when she saw him. I almost didn't recognize you. I guess that's a good sign. She walked around him, adjusting the collar of his shirt. You remember the rules? Ethan nodded. No one can know who I am. No exceptions. If you get into trouble, I solve it myself. If you're insulted, I endure it. If someone praises you, I don't reveal myself. Margaret smiled proudly. I raised you well. Ethan chuckled. I hope so. Her smile slowly faded. I'll admit something. What? I'm nervous. You? The woman who negotiates billion-dollar contracts? Margaret laughed. Business doesn't scare me. But watching my son work under the hot sun, that worries me. Ethan hugged her. I'll be fine. She squeezed him tightly before letting go. I know. Instead of being driven in the family's long black limousine, Ethan boarded a crowded city bus nearly an hour later. It was another first. He stood among office workers, construction laborers, students, and market traders. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody whispered his name. Nobody recognized him. Felt strangely freeing. A little boy sitting beside his mother looked up at Ethan and smiled. Are you a gardener? Ethan smiled back. I guess I am. My daddy grows flowers too. Then your daddy must work very hard. The boy nodded proudly. He says flowers make people happy. Ethan thought about those words during the rest of the journey. Perhaps they did. Williams Global Holdings looked different when he approached it on foot. Usually, security guards saluted him before opening the private entrance. Today they barely glanced at him. One guard stopped him. Delivery. No. Maintenance. New Gardner. The guard pointed toward a side gate. Staff entrance. No smile. No greeting. No respect. Just another worker. Ethan quietly thanked him and continued. Behind the company's magnificent headquarters lay a world most executives never saw. The maintenance building stood beside rows of greenhouses and storage sheds. Stacks of flower pots lined the walls. Garden tools hung neatly from wooden racks. The scent of fresh grass filled the morning air. An elderly man with silver hair approached him. "You must be Ethan." "Yes, sir. I'm Samuel." Ethan immediately recognized him. He was the elderly gardener who had dropped the flower pot a week earlier. Samuel smiled warmly. "Welcome." He extended a rough, calloused hand. Ethan shook it firmly. "Glad to have you. I appreciate the opportunity." Samuel laughed. "You don't need fancy words around here. We dig. We plant. We water. We survive." Ethan laughed. "I think I'll fit in." "I hope so." Samuel introduced him to the rest of the gardening crew. There was Musa, who specialized in trimming hedges. Ada, who cared for the flowers surrounding the executive parking lot. Peter, responsible for irrigation systems. And Joseph, whose cheerful singing echoed through the gardens almost every morning. Unlike the polished executives upstairs, these workers welcomed Ethan without judgment. They cared less about appearances and more about whether he was willing to work. Samuel handed him a shovel. "Let's see what you've got." The first 2 hours nearly defeated him. Digging flower beds was far more exhausting than he had imagined. His palms quickly developed painful blisters. Sweat soaked through his shirt before 8 o'clock. His back ached. His shoulders burned. By mid-morning, Ethan was breathing heavily. Samuel noticed. "Need a break." Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. "I'm okay." Samuel smiled knowingly. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not. I just don't quit easily." The old gardener nodded approvingly. "Good answer." Around 10 o'clock, office employees began arriving from nearby cafes carrying expensive coffees and breakfast sandwiches. Many walked directly past the gardening crew. Some ignored them completely. Others treated them like invisible objects. A young marketing executive nearly stepped on Ethan while talking on her phone. She frowned instead of apologizing. "Watch where you're working." Ethan quietly moved aside. Another employee tossed an empty coffee cup into a flower bed instead of using the trash bin. Joseph sighed. "Happens every day." Ethan picked up the cup. "No respect." Samuel overheard him. "You'll get used to it." "I don't want to." Samuel smiled sadly. "Neither did I." Late that morning, Ethan was assigned to maintain the flower beds surrounding the company's main entrance. Hundreds of employees passed him. Very few acknowledged his existence. Some spoke as though he couldn't hear them. "I don't know why they hire so many gardeners. They're always in the way. They probably earn more than they deserve." Ethan kept working. Every insult reminded him why he had come. He was finally seeing the company through different eyes. Shortly before lunch, something unexpected happened. As Ethan knelt beside a row of white lilies, a gentle voice spoke behind him. "Excuse me." He turned. Standing a few feet away was a young woman wearing a simple blue cleaning uniform. She held a bucket in one hand and several cleaning cloths in the other. Her dark hair was neatly tied back. She wore no expensive jewelry, no heavy makeup, just a warm smile that immediately caught Ethan's attention. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." She pointed toward the flower bed. "I just wanted to say, these flowers look beautiful." Ethan blinked. It was the first compliment anyone had given him since arriving. "Thank you." She smiled. "I pass here every morning. They've never looked this colorful. I'm still learning." "You're doing well." She noticed the dirt covering his face. "You've been working hard. I suppose that's part of the job." She laughed softly. "I'm Grace." "Ethan. It's nice to meet you." "You too." For a brief moment they simply smiled at each other. Then Grace looked at her watch. "Oh no. I'm already running late. She reached into the pocket of her apron. I almost forgot. She handed him a cold bottle of water. You look like you need this more than I do. Ethan stared at it. You don't have to. I know. But I want to. Without waiting for another response, she waved goodbye. Have a wonderful day, Ethan. You too, Grace. He watched her disappear into the building. Samuel walked over carrying a watering hose. I see you've made your first friend. Ethan smiled. Is she always that kind? Samuel nodded. That's Grace. She speaks to everyone. Security guards, gardeners, drivers, cleaners, even stray cats. Ethan laughed. Really? Samuel pointed toward a shaded corner of the parking lot. A small bowl of water sat beside several pieces of bread. She feeds them every morning. Ethan looked toward the building where Grace had disappeared. Something about her felt different. She hadn't looked down on him. She hadn't pitied him. She had simply treated him like another human being. Lunch break arrived at noon. The gardening crew gathered beneath a large mango tree behind the maintenance building. Everyone unpacked simple homemade meals. Rice, beans, bread, yam. Samuel noticed Ethan had brought nothing. No lunch. I forgot. Samuel immediately split his meal in half. Here. Ethan shook his head. I couldn't. You could. Before Ethan could answer, another familiar voice interrupted. I thought you might forget. Grace appeared carrying a small paper bag. She smiled shyly. I made too much food this morning. I was going to throw it away. Samuel laughed loudly. No, you weren't. Grace giggled. Okay. I made extra. She handed the bag to Ethan. Inside were neatly wrapped sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a small homemade meat pie. Ethan looked up in surprise. You made all this? She nodded. I don't like seeing people skip lunch. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. When? You thanked me. She smiled again before walking toward the building. Enjoy your meal. Samuel watched her leave. What did I tell you? Ethan looked down at the food. Nobody had ever cared whether he had eaten before. As a billionaire, people had served him because it was their job. Grace had fed him simply because she was kind. The difference touched him more deeply than he expected. That evening, Ethan boarded another crowded bus home. His entire body ached. His hands were blistered. His clothes were stained with dirt. Yet, for the first time in weeks, he smiled. When he arrived at the mansion, Margaret was waiting in the dining room. How was your first day? Ethan slowly sat down. I'm exhausted. I expected that. My back hurts. She smiled. I expected that too. My hands have blisters. She nodded. And? Ethan paused. Then he smiled. I met someone. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Oh, a cleaner. Already. She gave me water. Margaret smiled knowingly. Anything else? She shared her lunch. And? She didn't know who I was. Margaret leaned back in her chair. How did that make you feel? Ethan looked thoughtfully out the dining room window toward the beautifully maintained gardens outside. It felt. He searched for the right word. Real. For the first time in years, someone had shown him kindness without expecting anything in return. He didn't know it yet, but that simple bottle of water and homemade lunch marked the beginning of a journey that would change not only his heart, but the future of Williams Global Holdings forever. 3 weeks passed, and Ethan Williams slowly settled into his new life as one of the gardeners at Williams Global Holdings. Every morning, he boarded the same crowded city bus before sunrise. Every afternoon, he worked under the blazing sun, trimming hedges, planting colorful flowers, watering the lawns, and sweeping leaves from the company's sprawling grounds. The work was far harder than he had imagined. His once soft hands were now rough with calluses. The blisters had healed, only to be replaced by stronger skin. His shoulders had become broader from lifting bags of fertilizer and pushing heavy wheelbarrows. By the time he returned home each evening, his muscles ached, but unlike the emotional exhaustion he had carried after his failed engagement, this kind of pain felt honest. It reminded him that he had earned every drop of sweat. Most importantly, It reminded him that dignity had nothing to do with wealth. Samuel noticed the change one morning as they prepared flower beds near the executive parking lot. "You've improved," the old gardener said with a proud smile. Ethan chuckled while adjusting his gloves. "I still have a lot to learn." Samuel shook his head. "Not about gardening." Ethan looked at him curiously. "About people." Samuel pointed toward the freshly planted roses. "When you first came here, you noticed flowers. And now, you notice people." Ethan smiled quietly. Samuel was right. He had begun observing the company in ways he never had before. He noticed how security guards greeted executives with broad smiles, but barely acknowledged cleaners and maintenance workers. He noticed how managers spoke politely to clients over the phone but insulted junior staff the moment they hung up. He noticed how some employees thanked receptionists while others acted as though they were invisible. Every day revealed another layer of the company's hidden culture. And every day, one person continued to stand apart from everyone else. Grace. Grace's kindness had not changed since the day they met. If anything, it had become even more consistent. Every morning, she greeted the Gardners before entering the building. "Good morning, Samuel." "Morning, Joseph." "Morning, Ada." And "Good morning, Ethan." Her cheerful voice had a way of making even the busiest mornings feel lighter. Sometimes she brought extra fruit from home. Sometimes homemade meat pies. Other days, she simply stopped for a few minutes to ask how everyone was doing. "How's your shoulder, Samuel?" "Better." "Joseph, your daughter passed her exams?" He beamed. "She did. I'm so happy for her." Grace celebrated other people's happiness as though it were her own. She remembered birthdays. She comforted people who were sick. She checked on elderly employees. She even thanked the drivers who delivered office supplies. To Grace, every person deserved respect. It didn't matter what uniform they wore. One Tuesday morning, Ethan was trimming hedges outside the main entrance when Grace approached carrying 2 cups of tea. "I made an extra one." Ethan looked up. "For me?" She smiled. "You've been sneezing all morning." "I noticed." He laughed. "I didn't think anyone else had. I notice a lot of things." She handed him the warm cup. "Drink before it gets cold." Their fingers briefly brushed as he accepted it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Grace looked toward the flowers. "They're blooming beautifully. They finally survived the transplant." "I knew they would." "You did. You take care of them." She smiled warmly. "People who care usually succeed." Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "You really believe that?" "I do. Even when life isn't fair?" Grace's smile faded slightly. "My mother used to tell me something." "What?" "Never let the world change your heart." Ethan waited quietly. "She said bitter people spread bitterness, and kind people spread hope." I try to remember that every day. Those simple words stayed with Ethan long after she returned inside. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciated Grace's kindness. Inside the marketing department worked Vanessa Hart. Vanessa was 28 years old, stylish, ambitious, and determined to climb the corporate ladder no matter the cost. She came from a wealthy family and believed appearances determined a person's worth. She often wore expensive designer suits, drove a luxury sports car, and made sure everyone knew she associated with influential clients. Grace irritated her, not because Grace had done anything wrong, but because people genuinely liked her. Vanessa couldn't understand why. "She's just a cleaner," she muttered one afternoon while watching Grace laugh with several receptionists. Her assistant, Lydia, shrugged. "People say she's one of the nicest employees here." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Being nice doesn't get promotions." "No, it gets people talking." Lydia lowered her voice. "Have you noticed she's always speaking with that new Gardner?" Vanessa glanced through the window toward the entrance. There was Ethan, carrying watering cans while Grace stood beside him laughing. Vanessa frowned. "Honestly, she has terrible standards." Lydia giggled. "Maybe they're dating." Vanessa laughed loudly. A cleaner dating a gardener. How appropriate. The two women walked away, still laughing. Neither realized Ethan had overheard every word. He kept watering the flowers, pretending not to notice. But inside something stirred. He wasn't angry because they mocked him. He expected that. He was angry because they mocked Grace simply for treating another human being with kindness. Later that week, Grace found Ethan replacing damaged flowers outside the executive wing. She noticed his unusually quiet expression. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine." She tilted her head. "You're not a very good liar." He laughed softly. "You noticed." "I always notice." Ethan hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Doesn't it bother you?" "What?" "The way some people treat you." Grace looked toward the office windows. "I won't pretend it doesn't hurt." "It does." "Then why keep smiling?" She took a deep breath. "Because someone has to." Ethan remained silent. "If I become cruel because someone else is cruel, then they've changed who I am. I don't want to give anyone that kind of power." Her answer amazed him. She wasn't kind because life had been easy. She was kind despite life being difficult. Meanwhile, Margaret continued receiving Ethan's weekly reports. Every Friday evening, they met privately in her office after most employees had gone home. Ethan removed his gardening cap before sitting across from her desk. Margaret smiled. "I almost forgot you're my son." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." She opened a notebook. "So, what have you learned this week?" Ethan leaned forward. "The company has incredible employees." Margaret smiled. "I know. It also has terrible ones." Her smile disappeared. "I'm listening." He spent nearly an hour describing everything he had witnessed. Managers humiliating junior staff. Executives ignoring maintenance workers. Employees throwing rubbish onto freshly cleaned pathways. Supervisors taking credit for other people's work. Margaret wrote down every detail. Then Ethan added something unexpected. "There's one employee I think you should know about." "Who?" "Grace." Margaret looked up. "The cleaner. You know her?" Margaret nodded. "I've seen her personnel file. Perfect attendance. Excellent evaluations. Never once received a complaint." Ethan smiled. "That doesn't surprise me. What makes her special?" He thought carefully before answering. "She's the same person with everyone." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Whether she's speaking to a cleaner, or an executive, or a gardener, she treats everyone exactly the same." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Rare." "Very." The following Monday, Ethan experienced something that confirmed everything he believed about Grace. Heavy rain began pouring shortly after lunch. Employees rushed toward the building, trying to avoid getting wet. Some nearly slipped on the soaked pathways. The gardeners quickly covered delicate flower beds with protective sheets. While everyone hurried inside, Ethan noticed movement near the parking lot. Grace. She was kneeling beside a small cardboard box. Inside were 3 tiny puppies trembling from the cold rain. Without hesitation, Grace removed her own raincoat and carefully wrapped the puppies inside it. She picked up the soaked box and carried it toward the maintenance shed. Ethan hurried over. "I'll help." Together they dried the frightened animals using old towels. Grace smiled as one puppy licked her hand. "They're terrified. We should call animal rescue." "I already did." She looked relieved. "I'm just keeping them warm until they arrive." Samuel watched from the doorway. "I've known Grace for 5 years. And I've never seen her ignore anyone in need." He glanced toward the puppies. "Or anything." Unfortunately, kindness often attracts jealousy. As Grace carried cleaning supplies through the executive hallway later that afternoon, Vanessa deliberately stepped into her path. "Oh, I almost didn't see you." Grace smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hart." Vanessa folded her arms. "I've been hearing interesting stories." Grace looked confused. "Stories? You and the gardener?" Grace blinked. "Ethan? So you even know his name?" Grace smiled innocently. "Of course. We work together." Vanessa laughed mockingly. "You call chatting over lunch working together?" Grace's smile faded. He's my friend. Vanessa looked around before lowering her voice. You should remember your place. Grace stared at her. My place? You're a cleaner. He's a gardener. People are laughing at both of you. Grace answered calmly. People can laugh if they want. Vanessa smirked. You really don't care? No. What I care about is treating people well. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Naive. She brushed past Grace, intentionally knocking several cleaning supplies onto the floor. Without apologizing, she walked away. Grace quietly bent down and picked everything up. Ethan had witnessed the entire encounter from outside the glass entrance. His hands tightened around the handle of his wheelbarrow. Every instinct told him to confront Vanessa, to reveal exactly who he was, to remind her that the man she despised would one day own the company. Instead, he took a slow breath. No, not yet. If he revealed himself now, the masks would immediately return. He needed to see people's true character a little longer. He needed to know exactly who deserved to stay in the company, and who didn't. As Grace calmly continued her work without complaining, Ethan admired her even more. She had every reason to become bitter. Instead, she chose Grace. He smiled to himself at the thought. Perhaps that was why her parents had given her that name. She carried it beautifully. Neither Ethan nor Grace realized that Vanessa's wounded pride had quietly transformed into something far more dangerous. Simple mockery was no longer enough. Jealousy had begun taking root in Vanessa's heart, and before long, she would set in motion a plan that threatened not only Grace's job, but also the fragile trust growing between Grace and the humble gardener she believed was nothing more than an ordinary man. The first rays of sunlight spread across the gardens of Williams Global Holdings, painting the dew-covered flowers in shades of gold. The morning air was cool, carrying the fresh scent of roses, jasmine, and damp earth. Ethan pushed a wheelbarrow filled with newly planted marigolds toward the front entrance. For weeks ago, he would have driven through the company's private gate in a luxury car, stepping out in an expensive suit while employees rushed to greet him. Now he wore faded work clothes stained with soil. Oddly enough, he had never felt more alive. He carefully knelt beside one of the flower beds and began loosening the soil around the roots. Samuel had taught him that flowers needed room to breathe if they were going to grow strong. Treat them gently, Samuel often said. If you force them, they'll die. Ethan found himself thinking those same words applied to people. Some relationships couldn't be rushed. They needed time. They needed patience. And somehow, without either of them planning it, a quiet friendship had begun blooming between him and Grace. Like clockwork, Grace arrived at the main entrance at exactly 7:45 every morning. She wore the same neatly pressed blue cleaning uniform, her dark hair tied into a simple ponytail, and carried her cleaning supplies with effortless confidence. Before entering the building, she stopped beside the flower beds. Good morning, Ethan. Ethan looked up with a smile. Morning, Grace. She bent down to admire the flowers. These weren't here yesterday. I planted them after work. They're beautiful. They'll be even prettier in a few weeks. Grace smiled. I'll look forward to seeing them bloom. She reached into her lunch bag. I brought something. She handed him a small container. What is it? Lemon bread. My grandmother taught me the recipe. You made this. I did. Ethan accepted it carefully. You keep feeding me. Grace laughed. You work harder than anyone I know. I don't know about that. I do. She looked him up and down. You're losing weight. Ethan chuckled. I guess gardening is better exercise than a gym. Grace tilted her head. You used to go to the gym? Ethan realized he had nearly exposed himself. He quickly smiled. Sometimes. When I could afford it. Grace nodded, accepting the explanation without suspicion. Well. She pointed toward the bread. That should help. Thank you. You're welcome. She waved before heading inside. As Ethan watched her disappear through the glass doors, he couldn't help smiling. Samuel walked over carrying a bag of fertilizer. You smile a lot these days. Ethan looked embarrassed. Do I? Samuel grinned. You didn't even realize it. That afternoon, the weather changed unexpectedly. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, followed by a gentle drizzle. Most employees hurried indoors, but Ethan continued working beneath the covered walkway, transplanting young flowers into larger beds. A few minutes later, Grace appeared carrying an umbrella. "I thought you might need this." Ethan looked up in surprise. "You'll get wet." "I'll survive." She held the umbrella over both of them while he finished planting. They stood so close that Ethan could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing. The rain fell quietly around them. For a while, neither of them spoke. Grace finally broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You don't seem like a gardener." Ethan's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "I mean, you speak differently. You read books. You know about business. You always say thank you." She laughed softly. "Most gardeners I've met don't quote famous writers." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I like reading." "So do I." "Really?" Grace nodded. "I borrow books from the public library." "What kind?" "Anything. History, biographies, novels." She smiled shyly. "My favorite place in the city is the library." Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. "Mine too." Grace laughed. "I knew it. You don't fit the gardener stereotype." He smiled. "Maybe stereotypes are wrong. I think they usually are." The rain continued falling. Neither of them seemed eager to leave. Over the next several weeks, their friendship grew naturally. They began eating lunch together beneath the large mango tree behind the maintenance building. Sometimes Samuel joined them. Other times it was just the two of them. Grace usually brought homemade meals: jollof rice, fried plantains, bean cakes, vegetable soup. She always packed enough for two. "You don't have to keep sharing," Ethan said one afternoon. "I know. Then why do you?" Grace smiled while handing him a spoon. "My mother used to say, food tastes better when it's shared." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "My father used to say something similar." Grace looked interested. "What did he say?" "A full stomach is a blessing." She smiled. "He sounds wise." He was. A brief silence followed. Grace noticed Ethan's expression change. "You miss him?" He nodded. "He died when I was 20. I'm sorry. He taught me a lot." "Like what?" Ethan smiled faintly. "He believed character was more valuable than success." Grace's eyes brightened. "I like him already." Ethan laughed. "I think he would have liked you too." One Saturday, the company organized a volunteer cleanup of a nearby public park. Employees were encouraged to participate. Very few executives attended. Most claimed they were too busy. Grace arrived early. So did Ethan. Together they planted young trees, painted old park benches, and collected litter scattered around the playground. Several neighborhood children wandered over to watch. One little girl stared at Ethan curiously. "Mister." "Yes." "Are you really a gardener?" He smiled. "I am. Can you teach me how to plant flowers?" Before Ethan could answer, Grace knelt beside the little girl. "Of course he can." The child beamed. For nearly an hour, Ethan patiently showed several children how to dig small holes, place seeds carefully into the soil, and cover them gently. Grace watched him from a distance. There was something different about him. He treated every child with patience. He listened carefully. He never spoke down to them. Most surprisingly, he seemed happiest when helping others. Later that afternoon, Grace walked beside him. "You'll make a wonderful father someday." Ethan nearly stumbled. "What?" She laughed. "You have a gift with children." He looked away. "I've never thought about it." "I have." She smiled mischievously. "I've been observing you. Should I be worried?" "Maybe." They both laughed. As the weeks passed, Ethan found himself looking forward to every conversation with Grace. She never asked about money, never talked about expensive things, never tried to impress anyone. Instead, they discussed books, dreams, childhood memories, favorite foods, funny stories from work. One afternoon, they sat beneath the mango tree watching butterflies drift through the garden. Grace looked toward the towering office building. Can I tell you something? Anything. I have a dream. What is it? She hesitated. I want to open a community center. For children. Ethan listened quietly. A place where kids from poor families can study after school. Read books. Learn skills. Feel safe. She smiled sadly. I know it'll probably never happen. Why not? I barely earn enough to pay rent. She shrugged. Dreams are free. Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. I don't think it's impossible. Grace laughed. You sound very confident. I believe determined people find a way. She smiled. I hope you're right. What about you? What do you dream about? Ethan froze. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. I'd like to own a business someday. Grace nodded enthusiastically. I can see that. You can. You notice details. You solve problems. You care about people. She smiled warmly. You'd make a great boss. Those words struck Ethan harder than she realized. She had unknowingly described exactly the leader he hoped to become. That evening, Ethan sat with Margaret in her private office after work. She noticed the smile on his face immediately. You've had a good week. I have. Grace. He laughed. Is it that obvious? Margaret smiled. You mention her every Friday. Ethan looked slightly embarrassed. I do. You do. She poured him a cup of coffee. So, how's your investigation? Ethan opened his notebook. I've identified several managers who mistreat junior staff. I'll review them. But, he paused. What? I've also learned something important. Margaret leaned forward. People like Grace exist. I know. No. I mean, they're extraordinary. They're the kind of people who make an entire workplace better. Margaret smiled. They're rare. They are. He stared thoughtfully out the office window toward the gardens below. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people trying to impress me. Grace has never tried. She doesn't even know who I am. Margaret studied her son carefully. You're falling in love. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he smiled quietly. I think I'm falling in love with the way she sees people. Margaret nodded. That's a better foundation than falling in love with someone's face. The next morning, Ethan arrived early to prepare flower arrangements for the company's monthly board meeting. As he worked, Grace approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might need this. He accepted one gratefully. You always know. She smiled. I pay attention. They sat together on a nearby wooden bench overlooking the gardens. The morning was peaceful. Birds chirped softly in the trees. Employees had not yet begun arriving. For a few precious minutes, the entire company seemed still. Grace looked toward the rising sun. I like mornings. So do I. They remind me that every day is another chance. Another chance for what? She smiled. To become a better person than yesterday. Ethan looked at her for several seconds before speaking. You know. What? I've never met anyone quite like you. Grace laughed softly. I hope that's a compliment. It is. She smiled but quickly changed the subject. Come on. If we sit here much longer, Samuel will accuse us of being lazy. They both laughed as they stood. Neither noticed the figure watching from the second-floor executive balcony. Vanessa Hart. She had seen Grace hand Ethan coffee. She had seen them laughing together. And the sight filled her with growing resentment. To Vanessa, Grace was forgetting her place. To Ethan, those mornings were becoming the happiest part of his day. Their friendship had grown stronger with every shared meal, every quiet conversation, and every act of kindness. But while love was beginning to blossom in the gardens below, jealousy was taking root inside the office above. And jealousy, left unchecked, had a dangerous way of blooming into something far more destructive. The gardens of Williams Global Holdings had never looked more beautiful. The rows of roses that Ethan had planted during his first weeks were now in full bloom. Bright marigolds bordered the walkways, white lilies swayed gently in the morning breeze, and freshly trimmed hedges framed the glass headquarters like living sculptures. Employees often stopped to admire the flowers before entering the building. Ironically, many of them never thanked the gardeners responsible for maintaining them. Ethan no longer expected gratitude. Instead, he had learned to find satisfaction in the work itself. As he watered a bed of colorful petunias near the main entrance, Samuel walked over carrying a pair of pruning shears. "You've changed this place." Ethan smiled without looking up. "We all have." Samuel shook his head. "No. I've worked here for 26 years. I've never seen the gardens this alive." Ethan laughed. "You're exaggerating." "I wish I were." Samuel rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You care. Flowers know the difference." Ethan chuckled. "You really believe that?" "I do. And people know the difference too." Ethan glanced toward the towering office building. "I hope so." Inside the building, however, not everything was growing. Some things were rotting. Vanessa Hart sat in her luxurious corner office overlooking the front gardens. Through the large windows, she could clearly see Grace laughing with Ethan during their lunch break. Grace handed Ethan a homemade meat pie while he offered her one of the flowers that had broken during pruning. She accepted it with a bright smile. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Across the desk, her assistant Lydia noticed her expression. "Still watching them?" Vanessa scoffed. "It's embarrassing." "What is?" "A cleaner spending every lunch break with a gardener." Lydia shrugged. "They seem happy." "Exactly." Vanessa snapped her pen in half. "I don't understand why everyone likes Grace." Lydia hesitated. "Because she's kind?" Vanessa glared at her. "Kindness doesn't make someone special." "No. But people respect her." "They shouldn't." Lydia wisely chose not to argue. Vanessa stood and walked toward the window. For weeks she had watched Grace become more popular among the staff. Security guards greeted her warmly. Receptionists smiled whenever she walked past. Even senior maintenance workers spoke highly of her. It irritated Vanessa more than she cared to admit. Grace had no power, no wealth, no influential family, yet somehow people admired her. Vanessa had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, earning promotions and expensive titles. Still, she was respected out of fear more than affection. The realization stung. That afternoon, Vanessa attended a meeting with the finance director, Charles Benson. As the meeting ended, Charles absent-mindedly removed his expensive diamond bracelet and placed it on the conference table while answering a phone call. The bracelet was worth more than many employees earned in a year. Vanessa noticed. An idea slowly formed in her mind. She smiled. A dangerous smile. The next morning Grace arrived early as usual. She greeted the security guards. "Good morning, James." "Morning, Grace." She smiled at the receptionists. "Morning, everyone." "Morning." She even stopped to feed the 3 stray cats that had recently adopted the company gardens. Ethan watched from nearby. "You'll spoil them." Grace laughed. "I think they're already spoiled." One of the cats rubbed against Ethan's boots. "I think this one likes you. It's probably hoping for food." Grace smiled. "Or maybe it recognizes a kind person." Before Ethan could answer, Grace noticed a small scratch on his hand. "What happened?" "Rose thorn." She frowned. "You should clean it. It'll be fine." She opened her bag and removed a small first aid kit. "You gardeners never take injuries seriously." Before Ethan could protest, she gently cleaned the scratch with antiseptic. The sting made him wince. Grace laughed. "I thought you said you'd be fine." "I changed my mind." She placed a bandage over the cut. "There. Now you'll survive." Their eyes met. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Samuel cleared his throat loudly from several feet away. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Grace quickly stepped back, slightly embarrassed. "I should get to work." She smiled at Ethan. "Don't forget to change the bandage tonight." "I won't." She disappeared inside the building. Samuel grinned mischievously. "Rose thorn." It really was. "I'm talking about the other thorn." "What other thorn?" Samuel laughed. "The one that's stuck in your heart." Ethan shook his head, trying unsuccessfully to hide his smile. Meanwhile, Vanessa quietly set her plan into motion. She waited until lunchtime when most employees had left their offices. Charles Benson's assistant had informed everyone that the finance director was attending an external meeting. His office would remain empty for nearly 2 hours. Vanessa entered the office using a duplicate access card she had secretly borrowed weeks earlier. The diamond bracelet still rested inside the top desk drawer. She slipped it into her handbag. Her pulse raced, not because she feared being caught, but because she enjoyed feeling in control. She quietly locked the office behind her. The first part of her plan was complete. An hour later, she approached Lydia. "I need you to do something." "What?" "Call security." Lydia looked confused. "Why?" "Tell them you saw Grace leaving the finance department." "But I didn't." Vanessa lowered her voice. "Do you want your promotion?" Lydia swallowed nervously. Vanessa continued. "Just make the call." Reluctantly, Lydia nodded. Within minutes, the entire office buzzed with whispers. "The finance director's bracelet is missing. It disappeared from his office." Security's investigating. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Receptionists stopped chatting. Managers began locking office doors. The atmosphere grew tense. Grace had no idea what was happening. She continued polishing the conference room windows. Suddenly, 2 security officers approached. "Grace." She smiled politely. "Yes. We need you to come with us." She looked surprised. "Did something happen?" "We'll explain." Several employees immediately looked up from their desks. Whispers spread through the hallway. "What did she do?" "I heard something was stolen." "Really?" Grace followed the officers without resistance. She believed it was all a misunderstanding. Outside, Ethan was replacing flowers near the entrance when Joseph hurried toward him. "Ethan, what happened?" "They've taken Grace." Ethan stood immediately. "What do you mean?" "Security. They're questioning her." His heart sank. "Why?" "They think she stole something." Ethan dropped the watering hose and hurried toward the building. Inside the security office, Grace sat calmly across from the head of security, Mr. Collins. "I don't understand." Mr. Collins sighed. "A valuable bracelet has gone missing." Grace blinked. "What does that have to do with me?" "We received information that you were seen near the finance department." "I clean every department. That's my job." Collins nodded. "I know. But we still have procedures." "I understand." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "We need permission to search your locker." Grace hesitated only briefly. "Of course. I've done nothing wrong." A crowd had gathered near the staff lockers by the time Grace arrived. Employees whispered openly now. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked eager for drama. Vanessa stood quietly at the back, pretending to be concerned. Lydia couldn't meet Grace's eyes. Ethan reached the hallway just as Collins unlocked Grace's locker. His stomach twisted. He wanted to stop everything. But he couldn't. Not yet. The locker door slowly opened. Inside were Grace's lunch bag, her spare shoes, a small Bible, family photographs, cleaning supplies. Then Collins reached behind a folded sweater. His expression changed. He slowly pulled out a velvet jewelry box. The hallway fell silent. Grace stared in confusion. "What?" Collins opened the box. Inside lay the missing diamond bracelet. A collective gasp echoed through the hallway. Several employees covered their mouths. Others immediately began whispering. "I knew it. I can't believe she'd steal. She always seemed too nice." Grace looked as though the world had stopped. Her face turned pale. "No." She shook her head repeatedly. "No. I've never seen that before." Vanessa folded her arms dramatically. "This is disappointing." Grace turned toward her. "I didn't do this." Vanessa sighed loudly. "The evidence speaks for itself." "It doesn't." Grace's voice trembled. "I didn't steal anything." Ethan stepped forward instinctively. "I believe her." Every head turned toward the Gardner. Vanessa laughed. "Of course you do. What else would her Gardner boyfriend say?" Grace looked shocked. "We're not." Vanessa interrupted. This isn't helping. Collins raised a hand. Everyone calm down. He looked at Grace sympathetically. Until the investigation is complete. I'm afraid you're suspended. The words struck Grace like a physical blow. Suspended. Without pay. Without proof. Without anyone truly listening. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She slowly removed her employee identification badge. I've worked here for 5 years. No disciplinary record. No complaints. She looked around the hallway. I would never steal. Some employees looked away. Others continued whispering. Very few defended her. Samuel finally stepped forward. I've known Grace for years. So have I, Joseph added. She's innocent. Collins sighed heavily. I hope you're right. But I have to follow procedure. Grace nodded weakly. I understand. She placed the badge on the table. I'll cooperate. As she turned to leave, Ethan quietly caught up with her outside the building. She stood near the gardens staring blankly at the flowers she had admired every morning. I'm sorry, Ethan said softly. Grace forced a faint smile. You don't have anything to apologize for. I should have done something. You believed me. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes. That was enough. He struggled to find the right words. You'll come back. She shook her head. I don't know. They found the bracelet. I know. But I also know you. For the first time since the accusation, a tear rolled down Grace's cheek. I've never stolen anything. I know. She looked at him. Do you really? With all my heart. She smiled sadly. Thank you. She reached into her bag and removed the small container she had packed for his lunch. I almost forgot. He looked down. You still made me lunch? She laughed through her tears. I made it this morning. Before all this happened. I don't want it to go to waste. Ethan accepted the container with trembling hands. Grace adjusted the strap of her bag. I should go. She began walking toward the company gate. Halfway there, she stopped and looked back one final time. Take care of the flowers. I will. And don't forget to water the white lilies. I won't. She smiled one last time before disappearing through the gates. Ethan stood frozen, watching the woman he had fallen in love with walk away in disgrace. Inside him, anger burned hotter than ever before. Not because Grace had been suspended, but because someone had carefully planned this. Grace was innocent. He knew it. And whoever had framed her had just made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated a gardener who wasn't really a gardener at all. For the first time since beginning his disguise, Ethan realized the game had changed. Finding true love was no longer his only mission. Now he had another. He would uncover the truth, expose the real criminal, and clear Grace's name, no matter how powerful the person behind the scheme might be. The gardens of Williams Global Holdings felt strangely empty. The flowers were still blooming. The birds still sang from the tall trees surrounding the headquarters. Employees continued walking through the front entrance every morning with cups of coffee in their hands, chatting about meetings, deadlines, and weekend plans. Everything looked exactly the same. But to Ethan, nothing felt the same. For the first time since he had started working as a gardener, there was no cheerful voice greeting him at 7:45 a.m. No warm smile, no homemade lunch, no quiet conversation before the workday began. Grace was gone. He stood beside the flower bed where they had shared countless morning conversations. The white lilies she loved had opened beautifully overnight, yet instead of feeling proud, Ethan felt only sadness. Samuel walked over carrying a watering can. You've been standing there for 10 minutes. Ethan sighed. I know. You miss her. I do. Samuel looked toward the building. So do I. The company had changed in only a few days. Not because Grace was a cleaner, but because she had been one of the few people who made everyone feel seen. The receptionists no longer laughed as much. The security guards looked quieter. Even the maintenance staff seemed less cheerful during lunch breaks. Joseph noticed it too. It's funny, he said one afternoon as the gardening crew rested beneath the mango tree. What is? I never realized how much noise Grace made. Ethan smiled faintly. She wasn't loud. No. But somehow, Joseph searched for the right words. She made the place feel alive. Everyone around the table nodded. Ada looked toward the building. I still don't believe she stole anything. Neither do I, Samuel replied. Peter shook his head. Good people are always the easiest to accuse. Ethan quietly listened without saying a word. Inside, his determination was growing stronger. Grace had trusted him. She had believed in him. Now it was his turn to fight for her. That evening, Ethan arrived at the Williams mansion long after sunset. Margaret was waiting in her study. She immediately noticed the exhaustion on his face. You didn't eat dinner. I'm not hungry. Ethan. He remained standing near the window. They suspended her. I know. Margaret had already received a report from the company's legal department. I read the investigation summary. It's incomplete. I suspected as much. Ethan turned toward her. Grace didn't do it. I believe you. No. You believe me because I'm your son. Margaret stood and walked toward him. I believe you because you've spent 6 weeks studying people. You've never defended anyone without reason. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Tell me everything. For nearly an hour, Ethan described every detail. The accusation, the search, the bracelet, the whispers, Grace's tears, her final smile, the lunch she had still given him before leaving. Margaret listened silently. When he finished, she sat down behind her desk. What are you thinking? Ethan asked. She folded her hands together. I'm thinking this wasn't random. It wasn't. I'm thinking someone planned it. They did. She nodded slowly. But suspicion isn't evidence. I know. And if we reveal who you are now, the guilty person will destroy every trace. Ethan clenched his fists. So I just let Grace suffer? No. You find the truth. The following morning, Ethan arrived at work earlier than usual. Instead of beginning his gardening duties immediately, he walked through the flower beds near the executive entrance. He replayed everything in his mind. Grace had been accused shortly after lunch. The bracelet had appeared in her locker. Someone must have planted it. But who? His thoughts kept returning to one person, Vanessa Hart. He remembered every insult, every mocking smile, every cruel remark directed at Grace. Still, assumptions weren't enough. He needed proof. As the days passed, Ethan began paying closer attention to everyone. Not as a gardener, as an investigator. While trimming hedges outside the marketing department, he overheard conversations through open windows. During lunch breaks, he quietly observed who entered restricted areas. He memorized security patrol schedules. He noticed which employees avoided eye contact whenever Grace's name came up. Most importantly, he watched Vanessa. She appeared unusually relaxed. Too relaxed. One afternoon, she laughed with several executives in the company cafe. I always knew something was strange about that cleaner. Ethan tightened his grip on the pruning shears. Another manager nodded. You can usually tell what kind of person someone is. Vanessa smiled smugly. Exactly. It doesn't surprise me at all. Ethan looked away before anger betrayed him. She wasn't just satisfied. She was enjoying Grace's humiliation. Later that day, Ethan was watering flowers outside the parking lot when Lydia approached cautiously. She looked around to make sure no one was nearby. Ethan? He turned. Hello. She seemed nervous. She hesitated. I wanted to ask. How's Grace? Ethan studied her carefully. I haven't seen her. Lydia looked genuinely disappointed. I feel terrible. Why? She quickly shook her head. No reason. She turned to leave, then stopped. Ethan. Yes. Do you think she's really guilty? He looked directly into her eyes. No. Without another word, Lydia walked away. Ethan noticed something. Fear. She wasn't acting like someone who believed Grace was a thief. She was acting like someone carrying a secret. Meanwhile, Grace struggled to adjust to life away from the company. Every morning she woke up at the same time out of habit. She ironed her uniform before remembering she no longer had a job to go to. She quietly folded it again and placed it back inside her wardrobe. Her small apartment felt unbearably silent. Bills continued arriving. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her savings were limited. Still, none of those things hurt as much as losing her reputation. She had spent 5 years earning people's trust. 5 years. Destroyed in a single afternoon. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Adebayo, knocked gently on the door. Grace. She opened it with a smile that failed to hide her sadness. Good afternoon. I made some soup. You don't have to keep feeding me. Mrs. Adebayo smiled. And you don't have to pretend you're fine. Grace's eyes filled with tears. The older woman hugged her tightly. I know you didn't steal. Grace whispered. Thank you. It means more than you know. Back at Williams Global Holdings, Ethan continued working as though nothing had changed. He trimmed hedges, watered flowers, pulled weeds. But every evening after everyone left, his real work began. One night, Samuel noticed Ethan lingering near the maintenance building. Aren't you going home? In a little while. Samuel frowned. You've been staying late every night. Just catching up. Samuel wasn't convinced. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Ethan smiled. I will. The old gardener nodded. I trust you. Then he quietly walked away. That Friday evening, Margaret requested another private meeting. The executive floor was almost empty. She locked the office door behind Ethan. I've reviewed security procedures. And there are more cameras than I expected. Ethan leaned forward. Can we access them? Officially. No. She smiled slightly. Unofficially. Perhaps. Ethan's eyes lit up. But there's a problem. What? The footage automatically deletes after 30 days. How many days has it been? Margaret checked her notes. 23. They exchanged a look. Time was running out. We have 1 week, Ethan said quietly. Yes. After that, the evidence disappears forever. The next morning, Ethan visited the small public park where Grace often spent her weekends before the suspension. He wasn't sure she would be there. He simply hoped. As he walked past the children's playground, he saw her sitting alone on a wooden bench. She wore simple jeans and a light sweater. A notebook rested on her lap, though she wasn't writing. She was simply watching children play. For several seconds Ethan remained where he was. He had imagined this moment all week. Yet now that he was here, he didn't know what to say. Finally, he walked over. Grace. She looked up. A faint smile appeared. Ethan. He sat beside her. I've been looking for you. I figured you might. They sat quietly for a while. The sounds of children laughing filled the park. Finally, Grace spoke. I miss the flowers. Ethan smiled sadly. They miss you too. She laughed softly. I doubt flowers can miss people. I think they can. She looked at him. Have you been taking care of the white lilies? Every morning. And the roses near the entrance? They're blooming beautifully. She nodded with satisfaction. I'm glad. Another silence settled between them. This one felt heavier. Ethan. Yes. You shouldn't keep visiting me. He frowned. Why? People will talk. I don't care. I do. She looked down at her hands. You're a good man. You deserve friends who won't drag you into trouble. He shook his head. You're not trouble. They think I am. I don't. She smiled sadly. You always believed in me. I always will. Tears gathered in her eyes. You don't know how much those words mean. He wanted to tell her everything. That he wasn't really a gardener. That he owned the company. That he could end her suffering with a single sentence. The words rose to his lips. But he stopped. If he revealed himself now, the person who framed Grace would erase every remaining piece of evidence. Justice would disappear forever. Grace noticed his silence. What are you thinking? He looked into her eyes. I'm thinking that I promise I'll clear your name. She smiled gently. How? I don't know yet. But I will. She reached over and squeezed his hand. You don't have to carry my burden. I want to. She slowly withdrew her hand. Then promise me something. Anything. Don't let what happened to me change who you are. He frowned. What do you mean? She smiled through her tears. The world needs kind people. It doesn't have enough already. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Even after everything she had endured, even after being falsely accused, even after losing her job, Grace was still more concerned about protecting someone else's heart than her own. In that moment, Ethan realized he loved her more deeply than ever before. As they stood to leave, Grace looked back one last time. Goodbye, Ethan. He forced a smile. Not goodbye. She tilted her head. No. He looked at her with quiet determination. Just see you soon. Grace nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. She walked away, disappearing down the park path without looking back. Ethan remained standing beneath the trees until she was out of sight. His heart ached with every step she took. But his resolve had never been stronger. He no longer had the luxury of waiting. Only 7 days remained before the company's security footage would be permanently erased. Somewhere inside Williams Global Holdings lay the truth that could restore Grace's honor. And Ethan intended to find it, even if it meant risking the secret identity he had worked so hard to protect. The digital clock on Ethan's bedside table read 4:15 a.m. Sleep had become a stranger. For the past week, he had spent every waking moment thinking about Grace, replaying the events of the day she was accused. Every detail, every expression, every conversation circled endlessly in his mind. The missing bracelet, the anonymous report, the search, the velvet jewelry box, Vanessa's smug smile. Most of all, Grace's tear-filled eyes as she insisted she was innocent. Ethan sat up and rubbed his face. Only 7 days remained before the company's surveillance system automatically erased the footage from the day of the theft. 7 days. If he failed, the truth could disappear forever. He couldn't let that happen. By 6 o'clock, Ethan was already in the gardens of Williams Global Holdings, watering the flower beds near the executive parking lot. The morning air was unusually quiet. Samuel arrived carrying a sack of fertilizer. You've beaten me to work again. Ethan smiled faintly. I couldn't sleep. Samuel studied him carefully. You won't solve anything by wearing yourself out. I'm running out of time. Samuel looked around to make sure no one was listening. I don't know what you're investigating, but whatever it is, don't lose yourself. Ethan nodded. I won't. The old Gardner patted him on the shoulder before walking away. As the company slowly came to life, Ethan paid close attention to every employee entering the building. Some looked tired. Some looked cheerful. Others barely acknowledged the maintenance staff. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes later in a sleek silver sports car. She stepped out wearing a cream-colored designer suit and expensive sunglasses. A security guard hurried over to open the glass entrance. Good morning, Ms. Hart. She barely looked at him. No thank you. No smile. She walked inside as though the world existed solely to serve her. Ethan watched quietly. Nothing about her behavior suggested guilt. If anything, she appeared more confident than ever. That confidence bothered him. People who had nothing to hide rarely acted so comfortable after a major investigation. Around lunchtime, Margaret sent Ethan a brief text through the secure phone they had agreed to use only in emergencies. Meet me. Basement archive. 7 p.m. No signature. No explanation. Just those words. Ethan immediately understood. She had found something. The workday seemed to last forever. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, shortly after 6 o'clock, employees began leaving for the evening. Cars slowly exited the parking garage. Lights switched off floor by floor. Cleaning crews began their nightly routines. At exactly 7, Ethan quietly entered the basement archive through a service corridor rarely used by executives. Margaret was already waiting. She wore simple business attire instead of her usual power suits. In front of her sat a laptop. Beside it rested several thick folders. You came alone? She asked. Yes. She nodded. Good. Margaret locked the archive door before opening the laptop. I've spent the last 3 nights reviewing internal records. And I found something interesting. She turned the screen toward him. Several expense reports appeared. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then Margaret highlighted a series of unusually large payments. Marketing consultancy, event coordination, corporate hospitality. They're all fake. Ethan leaned closer. How do you know? Because the companies receiving these payments don't exist. He frowned. Money laundering? Possibly. She opened another file. The payments total nearly $3 million over the last 4 years. Ethan stared at the figures. Who approved them? Margaret clicked another document. One name appeared repeatedly. Vanessa Hart. Ethan's jaw tightened. I knew it. Margaret held up a hand. Careful. Financial fraud doesn't automatically mean she framed Grace. No. But it proves she's dishonest. Margaret nodded. It gives us a reason to look deeper. They spent the next hour reviewing invoices, contracts, and internal approval forms. The more Ethan read, the more disturbed he became. Several executives had signed suspicious agreements. Others had approved payments without proper documentation. The corruption extended far beyond one missing bracelet. Margaret closed another file. I've trusted these people for years. They've been stealing from the company. Ethan looked thoughtful. They're stealing because nobody thought anyone was watching. Margaret smiled sadly. They underestimated my son. Just as they prepared to leave, Margaret spoke again. There's one more thing. She opened a small envelope. Inside was a security access log. I requested entry records for the day Grace was accused. Ethan quickly scanned the document. Every employee who had entered restricted areas was listed. Then his eyes stopped on one name. Vanessa Hart. Finance Department. 12:43 p.m. Duration inside office. 4 minutes. Ethan looked up immediately. She was in Charles Benson's office. Margaret nodded. According to her schedule, she had no business being there. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. This wasn't proof, but it was the strongest lead they had found. The following morning, Ethan began observing Vanessa more carefully than ever. Instead of focusing only on her interactions with Grace, he watched everyone around her. He noticed how nervous Lydia became whenever Vanessa approached. He noticed junior employees immediately stop talking when Vanessa entered a room. He noticed Vanessa frequently locked her office door despite having no confidential meetings. Something wasn't right. Late that afternoon, Ethan was trimming hedges beneath Vanessa's office window when raised voices drifted outside. He instinctively paused. I don't care. Vanessa sounded furious. A quieter voice answered. It was Lydia. I don't like lying. You've already lied. I know. Then stop acting guilty. Lydia's voice trembled. What if someone finds out? They won't. There was a long silence. Vanessa spoke again. If you want to keep your job, forget everything. Footsteps approached the office door. Ethan quickly resumed trimming the hedge. Seconds later, Lydia hurried out, her eyes red from crying. She almost bumped into Ethan. Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay. She quickly walked away without meeting his eyes. Ethan watched her disappear down the hallway. His suspicions grew stronger. That evening, he boarded the city bus instead of returning directly to the mansion. Instead, he got off several stops later. He walked through a quiet neighborhood until he reached Grace's apartment building. He didn't intend to disturb her. He simply wanted to make sure she was all right. As he approached, he noticed Grace kneeling beside a small community garden behind the apartment complex. Several neighborhood children surrounded her. She smiled as she showed them how to plant tomato seedlings. No, she gently corrected one little boy. Don't push too hard. The roots need room. Another child looked up. Miss Grace, will they really grow? She smiled warmly. If we take care of them every day, they'll surprise us. Ethan stood behind a nearby tree watching quietly. Despite everything she had lost, despite the humiliation, despite unemployment, she was still giving, still teaching, Still smiling, Mrs. Adebayo noticed him. "You must be Ethan." He looked surprised. "You know my name?" Grace's elderly neighbor smiled knowingly. "Grace talks about you." His heart skipped. "She does. She says you're the kindest gardener she's ever met." Ethan smiled softly. "I don't know about that." Mrs. Adebayo laughed. "I've lived long enough to recognize a good man." She glanced toward Grace. "She's hurting. I know. But she hasn't lost her faith." Ethan looked toward Grace again. "I won't let this remain her story." Back at the company the next day, another unexpected opportunity appeared. Samuel approached Ethan carrying several maintenance requests. "The executive floor wants new flowers." "I'll take them." As Ethan loaded decorative plants onto a trolley, Samuel lowered his voice. "You've been looking for reasons to get upstairs." Ethan looked surprised. "Am I that obvious?" Samuel smiled. "Only to an old man who's watched you for weeks." He leaned closer. "I don't know what you're doing, but if it helps Grace, I'm with you." Ethan looked at him gratefully. "Thank you." The executive floor was almost empty when Ethan arrived. Most managers were attending an off-site conference. He quietly arranged flower pots outside conference rooms until he reached Vanessa's office. The door was slightly open. Inside, no one was there. His pulse quickened. This might be his only chance. He stepped inside cautiously. Everything was perfectly organized. Designer furniture, luxury perfume, awards displayed across the wall. Nothing immediately looked suspicious. Then he noticed something unusual. A second mobile phone resting inside an unlocked desk drawer. Beside it lay a small notebook filled with handwritten payment figures. Before he could examine them, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone was coming. Ethan quickly returned the drawer exactly as he found it and hurried outside, pretending to adjust a flower arrangement. Seconds later, Vanessa rounded the corner. She stopped abruptly. "What are you doing here?" Ethan kept his eyes lowered. "Replacing the office plants." She looked around suspiciously. "I didn't request flowers." "Maintenance schedule." She stared at him for several uncomfortable seconds. Finally, she nodded. "Finish quickly." "Yes, ma'am." As she entered her office, Ethan slowly pushed the trolley away. His heart pounded. He hadn't found enough. Not yet. But he was getting closer. Much closer. That night, Ethan met Margaret once more. He described everything he had overheard. Everything he had seen. The hidden phone. The notebook. Lydia's fear. Margaret listened carefully. "We're closing in. But we still need undeniable proof." Ethan nodded. "I know." She looked at him seriously. "And remember, if Vanessa framed Grace, she won't hesitate to protect herself." Ethan understood exactly what that meant. The investigation was no longer just about clearing Grace's name. It had become dangerous. Someone inside Williams Global Holdings had spent years hiding fraud, manipulating records, and silencing anyone who threatened the scheme. Grace had simply become an innocent victim standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now Ethan stood directly in the path of the truth. And somewhere inside the company, the real culprit was beginning to realize that the quiet Gardner asking too many questions might be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The atmosphere inside Williams Global Holdings was unlike anything Ethan had seen since he began working as a gardener. Employees whispered in hallways. Managers hurried from one office to another carrying folders and laptops. Department heads checked their watches every few minutes. Even the receptionists spoke in hushed voices. Late the previous evening, every employee had received the same email from the CEO's office. Mandatory all-staff meeting. Attendance required. Main auditorium. 10 a.m. sharp. No explanation had been given. No agenda had been attached. Only one instruction. Attendance is compulsory. Speculation spread through the company like wildfire. "I heard we're getting new investors." "No, I think the company is restructuring." "My manager said it might be layoffs." "I heard the future CEO is finally being introduced." "The CEO's son?" "They say he's been living overseas." "I heard he looks just like his father." "Do you think he'll be strict?" No one knew the truth. Only two people did. Margaret Williams and her son. Ethan stood alone inside the maintenance shed, staring at his reflection in a small cracked mirror hanging above the sink. He still wore the faded green Gardner's uniform. His boots were covered with soil. His gloves rested on a nearby bench. For nearly 2 months, this uniform had become part of him. It had taught him humility. It had shown him the true heart of the company. It had also led him to grace. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small folded note she had once slipped into his lunch bag. Simply read, "Don't work too hard today. Remember to drink enough water." The paper had become worn from being unfolded so many times. He smiled sadly. "I'll fix this," he whispered. "I promise." A knock sounded at the shed door. Samuel stepped inside. "You ready?" Ethan nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Samuel looked around to make sure they were alone. "I've been wondering, what? When all this is over, will you still remember us?" Ethan looked surprised. "What kind of question is that?" Samuel smiled. "I've seen powerful people change. They forget where they came from." Ethan walked over and firmly shook the old man's hand. "I'll never forget the people who taught me what leadership really means." Samuel's eyes glistened slightly. "I believe you." Meanwhile, on the executive floor, Vanessa adjusted the collar of her expensive navy blue suit. She admired herself in the mirror. Perfect, confident, successful. She smiled. Whatever this meeting was about, she wasn't worried. Grace had already been suspended. The investigation had gone quiet. No one had questioned her. Everything was under control. Her assistant Lydia entered nervously. "They're asking everyone to report to the auditorium." Vanessa picked up her designer handbag. "Let's go." Lydia hesitated. "Vanessa." "What?" "I haven't been sleeping." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Again. I keep thinking about Grace." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Forget Grace." "But." "No." She stepped closer. "If you lose your nerve now, you'll destroy both of us." Lydia lowered her head. "Yes." Vanessa smiled again. "Good." At exactly 10 o'clock, the company's enormous auditorium was filled. Nearly every employee occupied a seat. Executives sat in the front rows. Managers behind them. Administrative staff filled the middle. Cleaners, gardeners, drivers, and maintenance workers occupied the back rows. For perhaps the first time in company history, everyone sat together. No special sections. No separate entrances. Just employees. Ethan quietly took a seat beside Samuel in the last row. Several people looked at him curiously. "A Gardner? Why is he here?" Samuel simply smiled. Everyone was invited. The lights dimmed slightly. Soft instrumental music faded. Then Margaret Williams walked confidently onto the stage. The room immediately fell silent. She stood behind the podium and smiled warmly. "Good morning, everyone." "Good morning, ma'am," hundreds of voices replied. Margaret looked across the audience. "For many years, this company has measured success through numbers. Revenue, growth, profit." She paused. "And we've achieved extraordinary things." Applause echoed briefly. "But recently, I've realized we've neglected something even more important." She looked toward the back rows. "People." The room grew quieter. Margaret continued. "A company isn't built by buildings. It isn't built by stock prices. It isn't built by executive titles. It is built by people. Every receptionist, every cleaner, every driver, every gardener." Some employees exchanged confused glances. Others simply listened. Margaret's voice became firmer. "Unfortunately, not everyone in this company believes that." A murmur spread through the auditorium. Vanessa frowned. Where was this going? Margaret nodded toward the side entrance. "Please bring in Miss Grace." The doors slowly opened. Grace walked inside. She wore a simple cream-colored dress instead of her work uniform. The moment employees recognized her, whispers erupted. "She's back. Why is she here? I thought she'd been fired." Grace looked nervous. She hadn't been told why she had been asked to attend. Margaret smiled reassuringly. "Please have a seat in the front row." Grace obeyed quietly. She glanced around the auditorium. Then her eyes found Ethan sitting in the very back. He smiled gently. She smiled back. Neither spoke. Margaret returned to the podium. Before making an important announcement, "There is something that must be addressed." She nodded toward the large projector screen behind her. The lights dimmed. A video appeared. Security camera footage. The timestamp matched the day Grace had been accused. The audience leaned forward. The footage showed the finance director leaving his office. A few minutes later, Vanessa appeared. She looked around cautiously before using an access card to unlock the office door. The auditorium became completely silent. Vanessa's face lost its color. "No," she whispered. The video continued. For minutes later, Vanessa exited carrying her handbag. Another camera angle appeared. This one showed the employee locker area. The audience watched in stunned silence as Vanessa quietly approached Grace's locker while the cleaning staff were away. She looked over both shoulders, unlocked the locker, reached inside, placed a small velvet jewelry box behind a folded sweater, closed the locker, walked away. Gasps echoed throughout the auditorium. Several employees covered their mouths. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Grace stared at the screen in disbelief. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is edited." Margaret calmly replied, "It has been independently verified." Vanessa looked around desperately. Lydia slowly stood. Her hands trembled. She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Everyone turned toward her. "I lied. I told security I saw Grace near the finance office. I never did." Vanessa glared at her. "Sit down." Lydia shook her head. "No." Tears streamed down her face. "I couldn't live with it anymore." The room erupted into shocked whispers. Margaret raised a hand. "There is more." Another slide appeared. Financial records. Fake companies. Fraudulent payments. Millions of dollars transferred over several years. Every transaction approved by Vanessa. Several executives' names appeared beside hers. Some of those executives immediately attempted to leave the auditorium. Security officers blocked every exit. Margaret spoke firmly. "The police have already been notified." Panic spread across the front rows. One executive collapsed into his chair. Another buried his face in his hands. Vanessa looked around frantically. "This is a mistake." Margaret looked directly at her. "No, this is accountability." Then Margaret smiled. "And now, it is time for the second announcement." The auditorium fell silent again. She looked toward the very back row. "Ethan." Everyone turned. The Gardner slowly stood. Confused whispers spread immediately. "Why is she calling the Gardner?" Samuel smiled proudly. "Go on." Ethan slowly walked down the center aisle. Employees stared as he passed. Some recognized him as the quiet Gardner. Others remembered insulting him. Some had ignored him completely. Grace watched with growing confusion. Why was Ethan going on stage? He climbed the steps calmly. Margaret met him halfway. Without saying a word, she handed him a neatly folded navy blue suit. The audience watched in complete silence. Ethan smiled. "Thank you." He disappeared briefly behind the stage. Several minutes later, he returned. Gone were the worn boots. Gone were the faded clothes. Gone was the gardening cap. Standing before the company was a tall, confident man wearing an impeccably tailored navy blue suit. The transformation was astonishing. He looked every bit the billionaire heir. Margaret took the microphone. "I would like to introduce you to my son, the future Chief Executive Officer of Williams Global Holdings, Mr. Ethan Williams." Silence. Complete silence. Then, gasps exploded throughout the auditorium. "What? The Gardner? It can't be. Oh my goodness." Samuel smiled through tears. "I knew he'd make a fine leader." Grace remained frozen. Her heart pounded. She stared at Ethan as though she were seeing him for the first time. Her mind replayed every lunch, every conversation, every laugh, every promise. The Gardner was the billionaire's son. Ethan stepped forward and took the microphone. I owe every one of you an explanation. The auditorium became silent again. Nearly 2 months ago, I chose to work here disguised as a gardener. Murmurs spread again. I wasn't looking for promotions. I wasn't evaluating your gardening skills. I wanted to understand this company. He looked toward the maintenance staff. I wanted to know how people treated those they believed had nothing to offer. He turned toward the executives. And what I discovered broke my heart. He spoke about employees being ignored, gardeners being insulted, drivers being treated as invisible, cleaners being disrespected. Finally, he looked directly at Grace. But among all those experiences, I met someone extraordinary. Grace lowered her eyes. A woman who showed kindness every single day, not because she expected anything in return, but because kindness is who she is. He smiled gently. Grace never knew I was Ethan Williams. She only knew a gardener, and she treated that gardener with dignity. The audience turned toward Grace. Many looked ashamed. Some quietly wiped away tears. Ethan continued, Today, her name has been cleared. And today, every person in this company has seen the difference between status and character. He paused. The richest person in this room is not measured by the money in their bank account. He looked at Grace once more, but by the kindness in their heart. Thunderous applause erupted throughout the auditorium. Some employees stood, then more. Within moments, nearly the entire audience was on its feet. Everyone applauded. Everyone, except Grace. She remained seated. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks, not because her name had finally been cleared, but because the man she had trusted most had hidden the biggest truth of all. And as Ethan looked into her eyes from the stage, he realized something that no standing ovation could erase. He had won justice. He had exposed corruption. He had reclaimed Grace's reputation. But he might have just lost the woman he loved. The applause echoed through the auditorium long after Ethan lowered the microphone. Employees remained standing, many clapping with genuine admiration, others applauding simply because everyone else was. Ethan barely heard any of it. His eyes searched for only one person, Grace. She was still sitting in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Tears glistened in her eyes, but unlike everyone else, she wasn't smiling. She looked overwhelmed, confused, hurt. The revelation had cleared her name, but it had also shattered the foundation of the friendship she believed had been built on honesty. Ethan's heart sank. He had imagined this moment so many times. He had imagined Grace smiling with relief. He had imagined her finally understanding why he had kept his identity hidden. Instead, all he saw was pain. Margaret stepped back to the podium. Please remain seated. The applause slowly faded until the auditorium became silent once again. As you have all witnessed, she began, Miss Grace was falsely accused of theft. She paused, allowing the words to settle over the room. The investigation has proven beyond doubt that she was framed. Margaret turned toward Grace. On behalf of Williams Global Holdings, I offer you my deepest and sincerest apology. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company bowed her head. The sight stunned everyone. Executives who had worked with Margaret for years had never seen her apologize publicly to anyone. Grace immediately stood. Ma'am, you don't have to. Margaret gently interrupted her. Yes, I do. My company failed you. My managers failed you. Our investigation failed you. And for that, I am truly sorry. The room remained silent. Many employees lowered their eyes in shame. Margaret continued. Effective immediately, Grace's suspension is withdrawn. Her employment record will be completely cleared. She will receive full back pay, and the company will compensate her for the emotional and professional harm she suffered. A fresh round of applause filled the room. Grace whispered softly, Thank you. Margaret's expression then grew serious. There is another matter. She nodded toward the security officers standing near the exits. Several police officers entered the auditorium. The room instantly became tense. Vanessa's face turned pale. She slowly backed away from her seat. This is ridiculous. One of the officers approached calmly. Ms. Vanessa Hart. She forced a laugh. There must be some misunderstanding. The officer held up a document. You are under arrest on suspicion of fraud, embezzlement, evidence tampering, and making false accusations. Gasps echoed across the room. Vanessa's confident smile finally disappeared. She pointed toward Margaret. You planned this. Margaret remained calm. No, you planned this. You simply underestimated the consequences. Vanessa looked around desperately. You can't arrest me. My father knows ministers. My lawyer will destroy this case. The officer replied evenly, You're free to discuss that at the station. As the officers reached for her, Vanessa suddenly turned toward Lydia. You! Lydia flinched. You betrayed me. Tears streamed down Lydia's face. I should have told the truth sooner. Vanessa laughed bitterly. You think they'll forgive you? I don't know. Lydia wiped away her tears. But I can finally forgive myself. The officers escorted Vanessa toward the exit. She struggled against them. This isn't over. She pointed angrily at Ethan. You think you've won? Ethan met her gaze calmly. I don't. I think justice won. Those were the last words Vanessa heard before the auditorium doors closed behind her. The room remained silent for several moments. Then another executive suddenly stood. His voice shook. I'd like to confess. Everyone turned. It was Richard Hale, the procurement director. I approved fake invoices. I knew they weren't legitimate. Another manager slowly rose. So did I. Within minutes, several executives admitted their involvement in Vanessa's financial schemes. Some confessed voluntarily. Others remained silent until investigators approached them. Police officers quietly escorted several employees from the auditorium. The atmosphere felt surreal. People who had once seemed untouchable were now leaving in handcuffs. Samuel leaned toward Joseph. I never thought I'd see this day. Joseph nodded. The truth always grows. Samuel smiled. Like weeds. When the police finally left, Margaret addressed the remaining employees once more. I know today has been difficult. She looked around the room. But today also marks a new beginning. She turned toward Ethan. My son has spent nearly 2 months living among you. He has seen this company from the ground up. Quite literally. A few nervous laughs spread through the audience. Margaret smiled. Because of that, he will now share the changes we intend to make. She stepped aside. Ethan walked slowly back to the microphone. This speech felt far more important than revealing his identity. He looked toward the maintenance staff sitting in the back, then toward the receptionists, the cleaners, the drivers, the gardeners, finally the executives. When I first came here, I thought I was looking for a wife. Soft laughter rippled through the room. I was wrong. The room grew quiet again. I was also looking for a better company. He paused. I found extraordinary people. He smiled toward Samuel. People who work before sunrise. He looked toward Ada and Joseph. People who make this place beautiful every single day. Then toward the security guards. People who protect us. Then toward the cleaning staff. People who leave after everyone else so the rest of us arrive to clean offices every morning. His voice grew firmer. None of these jobs are small. The only small thing is treating another human being as though they matter less. Several employees lowered their heads. They knew exactly who they were. Ethan took a deep breath. Starting today, every employee will complete leadership training focused on respect and workplace culture. We will establish an anonymous reporting system for abuse. No employee will ever again fear retaliation for speaking the truth. Performance evaluations will include how managers treat their teams. Kindness will matter. Integrity will matter. Character will matter. The room erupted into applause. Even employees who had never spoken to Ethan before stood in support. After the meeting officially ended, employees slowly began leaving the auditorium. Many approached Ethan. Some wanted to congratulate him. Others wanted to apologize. The marketing executive who had once stepped over him near the flower beds approached nervously. "Mr. Williams." Ethan smiled politely. "You can call me Ethan." She looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I treated you terribly. You didn't even know me." Ethan nodded. "That's exactly the point." She lowered her head. "I understand now." Another employee approached. "I ignored you every morning." "I'm sorry." Then another. "I mocked Gardners. I'm ashamed." Within minutes, a small line had formed. People who had barely noticed him before were now eager to apologize. Ethan accepted every apology graciously. But one apology mattered more than all the others combined. And it never came, because Grace was gone. He scanned the auditorium. Front rows, side aisles, exit doors. Nothing. She had disappeared. His heart tightened. Without saying another word to the remaining employees, he hurried outside. The gardens stretched peacefully beneath the afternoon sun. The roses swayed gently in the breeze. The white lilies stood proudly near the entrance. Grace wasn't there. He searched the parking lot. Nothing. The cafeteria. Nothing. Finally, Samuel walked over. "Looking for someone?" "You've seen Grace." Samuel nodded slowly. "She left." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "Did she say anything?" Samuel hesitated. "Only one thing." "What?" "She thanked everyone." Ethan closed his eyes. "That's Grace." Samuel looked at him kindly. "She was crying." Meanwhile, Grace walked slowly through a nearby public square. She barely noticed the people passing around her. Everything felt unreal. Just a few hours earlier, she had believed Ethan was an ordinary gardener struggling to build a better life. Now she knew he was one of the richest men in the country. Every memory replayed itself differently. The lunches they had shared, the conversations beneath the mango tree, the rainy afternoons under one umbrella, the promise he had made to clear her name. Had any of it been real, or had she simply been part of an experiment? The thought hurt more than she expected. She reached the small community garden where she often found peace. Several children ran toward her. "Miss Grace." She forced a smile. "Hello." One little girl noticed her red eyes. "Are you crying?" Grace knelt beside her. "Just a little." "Did someone hurt you?" Grace looked toward the flowers. "No. They just—" She searched for the words. "Forgot to tell me the truth." That evening, Ethan returned to the mansion feeling no sense of victory. Margaret was waiting in the library. "I heard Grace left." He nodded. "I couldn't find her." Margaret poured him a cup of tea. "You expected this." "I know. You lied to her." "I omitted the truth." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "There's a difference?" Ethan sighed. "Not to someone whose trust matters." He sat heavily in one of the leather chairs. "I thought she'd understand." Margaret sat across from him. "Perhaps someday she will. And if she doesn't?" Margaret smiled gently. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life proving that the gardener she loved was never an act." Ethan looked down at his hands. The same hands that had planted flowers beside Grace. The same hands she had bandaged after a rose thorn scratched them. The same hands she had trusted. "I don't know how to fix this." Margaret leaned forward. "You can't fix it with money." "I know." "You can't fix it with titles." "I know." "You can only fix it." She smiled softly. "The same way you earned her friendship." "How?" "One honest day at a time." Late that night, Ethan walked alone through the mansion gardens. The moonlight reflected across the fountain. The flowers smelled just as they had at the company. He reached into his pocket. Grace's small handwritten note was still there. "Don't work too hard today. Remember to drink enough water." He smiled sadly, then carefully folded it again. "This isn't the end," he whispered into the quiet night. "It's only the hardest beginning." For the first time since the investigation began, Ethan realized that exposing corruption had been the easy part. Winning back Grace's trust would require something far more difficult. Not a grand speech, not a billionaire's fortune, but patience, humility, and the courage to prove that beneath the tailored suits and family name, the humble Gardner she had come to love had always been the real Ethan Williams. The morning after the company meeting was the quietest morning Ethan Williams had experienced in months. For the first time since beginning his disguise, he did not wake before dawn to catch the crowded city bus. There was no faded gardener's uniform waiting on the chair beside his bed. No worn-out boots with traces of soil still clinging to the soles. No gardening gloves. Instead, his valet had laid out an expensive charcoal gray suit, polished Italian leather shoes, a silk tie, and a luxury watch. Everything that had once been normal now felt strangely unfamiliar. Ethan stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection looking back at him. The billionaire heir had returned. But somehow, he missed the gardener. A knock sounded on his bedroom door. "Come in." Margaret entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this." He smiled faintly. "I do." She handed him one of the mugs before studying her son's face. "You didn't sleep." "I tried." "You kept thinking about Grace." Ethan gave a tired laugh. "Is it really that obvious?" "It is to a mother." He walked toward the balcony overlooking the estate gardens. "I've finally become the man everyone expected me to be." Margaret joined him. "And yet, I've never felt further away from the person I wanted beside me." She remained silent. Sometimes there was no advice that could soften heartbreak. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace sat by the window of her small apartment with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The previous day's events replayed endlessly in her mind. She had always believed Ethan was a hard-working gardener trying to build a better future. She admired his humility, his kindness, his determination. Now she knew he had been born into unimaginable wealth. The discovery should not have changed who he was, yet somehow changed everything. She picked up her phone. There were dozens of missed calls. Friends, former co-workers, unknown reporters hoping for interviews, even several executives from Williams Global Holdings. She ignored them all. Then another call appeared. Ethan Williams. Her thumb hovered over the answer button. For several long seconds, she considered it. Then she quietly declined the call. Moments later, another message arrived. "Grace, please let me explain." She stared at the words. Tears gathered in her eyes. "I wish you had done that from the beginning," she whispered. Back at company headquarters, Ethan officially resumed his place on the executive floor. Employees stood as he entered the boardroom. "Good morning, Mr. Williams." "Good morning, sir." He smiled politely. "Please sit." The directors looked nervous. After yesterday's arrests, everyone understood that the company's culture was changing. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table. He glanced around the room. Several chairs remained empty. Vanessa's, Richard Hale's, others who had been arrested. The silence felt heavy. Margaret opened the meeting. "Our first priority is rebuilding trust." Everyone nodded. The human resources director spoke first. "We've already begun reviewing employee complaints from the last 5 years. The operations director added, "We're introducing anonymous reporting." Another executive outlined ethics training. Ethan listened quietly, then finally spoke. "I have one request." The room became silent. "From today forward, there will be no executive dining room." Several people looked surprised. "What?" "We all eat in the same cafeteria." He continued, "I also want reserved parking removed." One director frowned. "Sir, that has been company tradition for decades." Ethan smiled. "So has treating people differently." The room fell silent. Margaret smiled proudly. No objections. The decision was approved. Despite the progress inside the company, Ethan's thoughts remained elsewhere. That afternoon, he drove to Grace's apartment. Not in the family limousine. Not with security. Alone. He parked several streets away and walked the rest of the distance. When he reached her building, Mrs. Adebayo was watering flowers outside. She recognized him immediately. "So, you're the famous Mr. Williams." Ethan smiled awkwardly. "I suppose I am." She laughed softly. "You look different in a suit." "I feel different too." She studied him carefully. "You've come for Grace." "Yes." Mrs. Adebayo sighed. "You're too late." His heart sank. "Where is she?" "She left this morning." "Where?" "I don't know. She said she needed somewhere peaceful." Ethan looked disappointed. "Did she leave a message?" The elderly woman nodded. "For you." She reached into her apron pocket and handed him a folded envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a neatly handwritten letter. "Dear Ethan, thank you for believing me when almost no one else did. Thank you for fighting to clear my name. I'll never forget that. But I also need time. Not because you're rich. And not because you lied about your name. I need time because I don't know which parts of our friendship were real anymore. When we talked beneath the mango tree, were you Ethan the Gardner? Or Ethan the billionaire? When you listened to my dreams, were you my friend? Or studying me? Maybe one day I'll know the answer. Until then, please don't look for me. Take care of the flowers. Grace." Ethan read the letter twice, then a third time. Every sentence hurt. Not because Grace accused him of bad intentions, but because she genuinely didn't know what to believe, and he couldn't blame her. He folded the letter carefully. "Thank you," he told Mrs. Adebayo. She looked at him kindly. "She's not angry." "I know. She's hurt." "I know. There's a difference." He nodded. "I understand." The older woman smiled gently. "If you truly love her, don't chase her because you're lonely. Wait until you're someone she can trust again." The following weeks became some of the busiest in Ethan's life. As acting CEO, he worked tirelessly to transform Williams Global Holdings. Every department underwent review. Managers known for abusive behavior were replaced. Wages for maintenance workers increased. The company introduced scholarships for employees' children. The executive dining room was converted into a shared employee lounge. One afternoon, Ethan surprised everyone by eating lunch with the Gardners. Samuel laughed. "I thought billionaires only ate fancy food." Ethan held up his plate of jollof rice. "Tastes pretty fancy to me." The Gardners laughed. Word quickly spread through the company. The future CEO still treated Gardners like friends. He still stopped to water flowers. He still greeted security guards by name. He still thanked cleaners for their work. Employees slowly realized something remarkable. The Gardner hadn't been an act. That had always been the real Ethan. One evening, Margaret entered Ethan's office after most employees had gone home. She noticed him staring through the window toward the gardens. "You've been out here every evening." "I know. Hoping Grace will appear?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe." Margaret sat beside him. "You've changed this company." "I've tried. The staff trusts you." "I hope so." She looked toward the gardens. "Yet you still look unhappy." Ethan laughed quietly. "I fixed everything except the one thing that matters." Margaret rested a comforting hand on his arm. "You can't rush healing." "I know. You planted flowers for weeks before they bloomed." He smiled. "I remember. Relationships are the same." Unknown to Ethan, Grace had temporarily moved to a small town nearly 3 hours away. A retired schoolteacher had offered her a room in exchange for helping maintain a neglected community garden. Grace accepted. The peaceful surroundings gave her space to think. Every morning she worked with children, teaching them how to plant vegetables. Every afternoon she read books beneath a large mango tree. The simplicity reminded her of happier days. Still, certain memories refused to fade. Whenever she saw white lilies, she remembered Ethan carefully watering them. Whenever she packed lunch, she instinctively packed enough for two. Whenever she saw a gardener working, she smiled before remembering why it hurt. One afternoon, little 8-year-old Miriam noticed Grace staring into the distance. "Miss Grace." "Yes. You're thinking about someone." Grace laughed softly. Am I that obvious? The little girl nodded. My grandma says people smile differently when they're remembering someone they love. Grace looked away. I don't know if love is enough. 3 months passed. Williams Global Holdings flourished under Ethan's leadership. Employee satisfaction reached its highest level in company history. Productivity improved. Staff turnover decreased. News outlets praised the company's remarkable cultural transformation. Journalists repeatedly asked Ethan the same question. What inspired these changes? He always gave the same answer. I learned that the strongest companies are built by people who respect one another. He never mentioned Grace's name, but in his heart, every decision was inspired by her. Every act of kindness reminded him of her. Every flower blooming outside company headquarters reminded him of the woman who had taught him that true greatness wasn't measured by wealth, but by the way a person treated those who could offer nothing in return. Late one evening, after another long day at the office, Ethan walked alone through the gardens. The white lilies stood in full bloom. He gently touched one of their petals and smiled. I kept my promise, he whispered. I took care of the flowers. He looked toward the night sky. But now, I just hope life is taking care of you. Miles away, in the quiet community garden of a small country town, Grace knelt beside a row of young lilies beginning to bloom. She paused unexpectedly, smiled to herself, and whispered into the evening breeze, I hope you're taking care of yours too. Neither of them knew it, but fate had not finished writing their story. Sometimes love needed distance, not to end, but to grow roots deep enough to survive the truth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.